This title, Escape Velocity, one of the things about being an author is you don't stop writing. And so this is a book that's coming out in the fall. But the difference between this and Crossing the Chasm is Crossing the Chasm was written from the point of view of the innovator going forward. This book is written from the point of view of the established enterprise reaching backward and trying to catch the next wave and participate in the next wave. And the subtitle of the book is called Free Your Company's Future from the Pull of the Past. And my take with this the Smart Grid initiative is that what we're trying to do is free an industry's future, possibly a nation's future, from the pull of the past. And one of the things as you get older and as you work more and more with established enterprises, you gain a very deep respect for the past and the pull of the past and what's involved. In doing that, what you kind of see is we get into this world where the enterprises aren't stupid. They're not unaware. It's not that they don't get it. It's that they're stuck. And they look around and they say, look, we know that technology and globalization is changing the game. We know these are fabulous opportunities, and they're also threats. But and if you look at the energy world, renewable energy sources, smart grids, okay, yeah, we got it. Thank you. You don't have to like spell it for us. We got it. Okay? We know that we're supposed to engage with these things. And again, but here's the problem. As soon as I go to reach to engage, if I'm the CEO or the director or the vice president or the executive vice president or somebody in the middle of the organization, all of a sudden this invisible hand starts redirecting as I reach for a resource, it keeps sending me back to where I went last time. And so as you start looking at that, you start saying, what's going on? And in the case of the smart grid, there's just so many constituencies involved, and they all do have, they have some alignment of interest, but they also have conflicting interests. And so how do you negotiate that? And so you feel like, man, we're taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, and how does it get going? That happens inside of corporations. I mean, great corporations, and it happens even more so if you have to work across many, many corporations. And so the corporation, the red lines are what the corporations are experiencing. This is what drove the book. Year in, year out, CEO after CEO after CEO kind of complaining to themselves, to me, to anybody that'll listen, we end up with the same portfolio. Nothing ever achieves materiality. I mean, not ever, but there's this huge frustration of, man, what's going on? Why can't we get there? And if we look at the smart grid world, I think we're in this world right now of pilot after pilot after pilot. How many times pilot? How many times can you pilot? Right? Okay. And the answer is more than you think. Right? Okay? So how can we achieve escape velocity? That's the question of the book. How do we free ourselves from the pull of the past? And what I'm going to try to suggest to you today is, well, where would the real breakthroughs come from? Now, I'm not an energy expert. I'm an IT expert. So the patterns I'm going to describe to you come out of the IT industry. And the IT industry is not a regulated industry. So there's a set of dimensions that you have to overlay onto the patterns I want to share with you. But I think there's a vocabulary here that you can use, that we all can use, because we're all part of this need to free the energy grid from its past and to participate in the future. And I hope the vocabularies will help us pick the right actions at the right points in time. And that's kind of where I'm going to end up with this thing as to what do we do next and why would that be next and not something else. Now, the good news is, as Judith was saying, this is a movie we've seen before. The whole category maturity life cycle, starting with the technology adoption life cycle, we've got multiple decades of experience with this. We know that there's these very, very strange dynamics around emerging markets that have chasms and tornadoes and stuff in them. And I'm going to come back to this model at the end of the talk. But we know that that's kind of going on at the beginning. We know there's this fabulous time when all of a sudden this clouds clear and just things take off. And you have these incredibly vibrant decades where it's like you repave the earth. You create the interstate highway system. You bring out the internet. Think about it. It was 15 years ago, basically, we didn't have a World Wide Web, right? I mean, the World Wide Web started 15 years ago, and it has transformed the planet. So that B thing does happen, and it is incredibly exciting. But it doesn't happen until after A. It's kind of like that alphabetical thing, right? Then there's C, which is kind of the mature market, and then and that can last forever. And in fact, in the case of the grid, it's lasted about 100 years. In the case of automobiles, we're probably at 90 years, something like that, right? There are declining markets and eventually obsolete markets. And we've watched this with digital media, what it did to film. We'll see. There will be a time when the combustion engine may become, at least some version of the combustion engine will become obsolete in a new energy world where carbon credits are as expensive as our movie was suggesting. But anyway, we've seen this thing. Here's what I want to draw your attention to. To negotiate the first half of this model, business models have to evolve through a known set of sequences, but realize how different each model is. So it always starts with projects. It always starts with projects. And you can do a project almost at any time. To cross that chasm, and as I said, we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the talk, you move from projects to solutions. And the narrative changes from being about the technology to being about the problem that is being solved. So it's no longer about the smart grid. It's about whatever problem the smart grid solves first that is a social problem. Okay? And so moving the narrative from you have to understand a kilowatt hour, that thing that Judith said, to saying, no, it's not about kilowatt hours. It's about whatever the interest is of the people that we're solving for. That's what it's about. That's when we've crossed the chasm. We're not there yet right now because when Katie asked the panelists, well, what's the killer app? It's like, well, we don't know yet. We don't know yet. So that's just, all that is a signal. We're still probably projects pre-solutions. When you get into that incredible explosion, what happens is products take off everywhere. So all of a sudden, Silver Spring, or whoever's got the meters of choice of that time, they're everywhere. And the next, the set of transformers or whatever has to be in the stations that intermediate, they're everywhere. And the software starts getting everywhere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a huge amount of investment. When Kurt was talking about the fact that private capital is interested in this world, it's because when you get to the products model, there's an enormous amount of money that is going to change hands as we sort of smarten up the grid across not just the United States, but the world. Then it settles down into a systems model, which is, okay, now we got to run this stuff. And we're going to maintain this stuff for a long, long time to come. Now, the reason I put these 5 up is I kind of want to show you the negotiation dance that we're going through and why it's challenging. If you look at the startups and the VC-backed technology innovators, and how, the Silicon Valley kinds of stuff, and it's not just in Silicon Valley, but this is the kind of stuff we're famous for. VC-backed startups, entrepreneurs, are great at doing projects, and if they're coming out of a relatively small company, they can afford to focus on solutions, because these solution markets are typically tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, but they're typically not billions of dollars. And so when it starts getting to billions of dollars, the startup is not big enough to handle that size, and the vendors who are the more established vendors want to come in. So the established vendors will try to reach back and do solutions, but it's hard for them. If you're a Cisco or an HP or an IBM or a Siemens or a GE or an AB, whatever it is, ABB, you have tens to 20s to 40 to $50 billion worth of revenue. It's hard to focus on a market that might only be $100 million. Whereas the startup's going, 100 million, you kidding me? Let's go, right? So that's why the dotted lines are the ones that are hard. But once you get into a product model and they say we can leverage our global footprint, we can leverage our global sales, we can leverage our global manufacturing, man, let's go. And by the way, we understand systems, and as the market matures, we will go from products to systems, and we will be end-to-end IBM, end-to-end Cisco, end-to-end Oracle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the utilities who have to run these things, they can't get involved in that early stuff because it's just too changeable, it's too unestablished, there's too much chaos in the early part of this model. And even when it comes to products, they're going, man, I don't even know that I like new products. When it comes to systems, they're going, yes, systems, we understand. And maintenance, we are good at maintenance, right? We can maintain forever. So there are 3 constituencies, and the point I want to just make you sensitive to is you've got to know where you are in this model in order to understand why certain constituencies are being very receptive to your messaging and very collaborative and cooperative with you, and other constituencies are holding back. And it's not that the ones that are holding back are stupid, right? It's like when people start talking loudly to a person, It's like, no, they're not deaf. They just have things that are holding them back. And you have to honor that because, let's face it, you don't want a kind of try and buy utility, right? I mean, it's like in Japan. No. We want a very reliable utility. We don't want kind of like, well, I don't know, what's the red button for? I don't know, let's push the red button and see what happens. That's not the way you want to run a utility. Okay? So the point about this exercise is we just have to respect the dynamics of the life cycle and honor those things and not say, look, those guys are dumb, they don't get it, we're smart, we get it. Getting it means knowing where you are in the life cycle model and being able to negotiate the best next step for where you are in the model. Now, there's a lot of opinions about where we are in the model, and that's what the collaboration, consensus, and dialogue that you guys are having here is important for. But it is contingent on where you are, depending on what's the right next step. Challenge number 2 is just the sheer magnitude of what we are talking about here. Because we think $1 trillion is a lot of money in tech. But in the energy industry, it's not a lot of money. I mean, not really. Not if you look at the industry is about an order of magnitude bigger in scope than the IT industry, which is where we've got all these models came from. So I know how to help companies figure out how to do the enterprise complex systems business, and I know how to help them do the consumer volume ops business. But this issue of how do I help them figure out, these mega transformations of the grid and this completely socially inclusive, consumer edge. I mean, we're now going, these are way outside the normal bounds of industry business models. So don't use the computer industry as your only benchmark, because the computer industry is playing inside the blue area and inside the red area. The blue area is the IBMs, the Ciscos, the Oracles, whatnot, and the red area is the Apples, and the Autodesks and the Adobes and people that are doing more consumer-oriented things, and the Facebooks and those guys. But this one is a big challenge on either side, and so it just and it's regulated, so it just one more challenge. So just to capture that in relationship to consumerism. If you look at this model, the volume ops model, you'll be surprised to hear, requires volume. And it doesn't actually kick in until there's enough volume to make the economics of a volume operation work. Prior to that, the complex systems model comes into play. Now, so what that means is, if you're looking at the technology adoption life cycle, the complex systems model is the only model that works until you get enough adoption to have a volume operations economic model work. And you have to think about that right now, because if there isn't enough volume to make the volume operations model pay off, don't be surprised if there isn't a lot of investment in volume operations. And yet the consumer requires a volume operation investment in order to make these visions come out. So in this issue, I believe that we're still potentially, well, I think we're actually ahead of that curve, which means you still have to take the consumer, and you still want to involve the consumer, you still want to engage with those issues, but you have to understand that going to Best Buy doesn't work for Best Buy until there's enough volume, okay? And getting that volume going requires working with other constituencies until there's enough volume to then invite in the folks. So if the utilities will distribute the first generation of smart meters, that's a complex system solution. And the second generation, if you go to the store and buy your own smart meter, that's a volume operation solution. So Apple, cell phones, those are all volume ops. There's no more Western Digital. Bell Telephone does not ship you a phone. You buy your own endpoints in the phone system. But today, I think it's still too early for that to happen in the electrical system, which means you've got to play this game as a complex systems game, which means you've got to play with the big kids for the foreseeable future, at least in my view. That's what this model is going to suggest. You have to work big institutional problems with institutional budgets, with people who have institutional technological capabilities and who have institutional capital to spend against issues, although clearly the ultimate goal is to transfer this to a volume ops consumer-oriented utility. But to go too soon will cause this chasm problem, which I'm going to close with in just a minute. So, not enough volume to make the volume operations model work. Consumer-led initiatives cannot get traction until after the heavy lifting's been done. So if you might say, hey, Jeff, you're wrong. You know what? There is enough volume. We can do this. That is a legitimate alternative point of view. But what you're saying to me is, Geoffrey, you're in the wrong part of the model. And that's what this model is for. It's to figure out, well, where are we in the model? If I propose we're at the front end of the model, then the model says complex systems only. If you're saying, I don't believe that, maybe the real dialogue is, well, Geoffrey, I think this is further along than you know or that you appreciate or whatever. And now I want to get to the third and final piece of this thing, which is the culture wars. And we're talking about, you know, persuading people and enlisting people and the collaborative dialogue. And Katie was talking about, you know, the dialogue as well. One of the things you discover when you look at the dynamics of innovation is that cultures, there are business cultures that emerge that kind of follow a little bit of this technology adoption life cycle. And at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I don't know, that's what's on this grid here, the 4 things in it. It turns out that 4 business cultures sort of build themselves around it. I want to show you the cultures, and I want to show you how I think it's playing out in the smart grid, because I think it's another way just to honor and appreciate the adoption challenges we're looking at. So at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, he said, look, you got to have order and security. The culture that relates to this is a control culture. Planned, hierarchically managed, plan your work your plan, et cetera. The next thing in Maslow's thing was, okay, now we want to participate, we want to belong, we want to collaborate. That's a collaboration culture. You heard a lot about collaboration culture. You'll see why in just a minute, why the collaboration culture is coming to the fore right now in this movement. There's also the achievement part of Maslow's thing, which is I want to win. I want to win big. I want to beat the other guys. That's a competition culture. And finally, there's the self-actualization, which is I want to be creative. I want to just like be brilliant. I want to dare to be great, whatever. Well, okay, so what? What does this have to do with us? By the way, the reason it's organized in this grid is the top 2 are very individually oriented. In order to move quickly, you allow the individual a lot of freedom. The bottom 2 are designed to bring the group together. So obviously, they move slowly. There's a wonderful African proverb which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. So the go fast is the 2 on the top, and the go far is the 2 on the bottom. The 2 on the right are very oriented toward data, numbers, and statistics, and making the numbers, making the plan. And the 2 on the right are more oriented toward narratives and values and aspirational and daring to be great. And so every one of us in this room probably has an affinity with one of these quadrants, maybe more than the other 3, and maybe there's a quadrant that we have an anti-affinity with going forward. Okay? I just don't happen to like that. And the diagonals tend to quarrel with each other, okay, in terms of going forward. Well, here's why I think it matters to the smart grid dialogue. So if we look at this thing, remember I said the business models? Who's great at projects? The creative guys, right? They don't have to actually scale. They just have to invent the cool new stuff. When it becomes really, really big to scale, that's not their problem. Who's good at doing solutions? Who's good at crossing the chasm? Collaboration cultures. Why? Because they listen. They listen and they care and they empathize and they think, they put other people first and they figure out what's the first best thing we can accomplish right now. Who's good at scaling this stuff and making a fortune while they're doing it? The competition cultures and with the product model. Oracle, Microsoft, Cisco, Sun, you know, Dell, all these, they're just very, very competitive, and they're very, very good at scaling things economically. So when you have these massive build-outs, that's who will come into the fore. But right now, these people are hanging back because they're saying there's not enough action yet here to play our game. And then who does the systems and maintenance? Control cultures. Okay? Control cultures is very much process-oriented. Look, this is how you maintain a system. You can't just change things at random. You have to have procedures. You have to have processes, you know, et cetera, et cetera. There's no culture here that's right, and there's no business model here that's right, but there clearly are affinities, and if we do the final connection, we say, look, entrepreneurs, projects, creativity, Silicon Valley, startups, VC-backed, collaboration, it's interesting where the collaboration culture is going to come from. I put policymakers in here because I want to have somebody who will reach out, but I think that, I mean, I just listened to Patty, and I was listening to Kurt and listening to Judith. The folks at this conference, I think this is about trying to create a collaborative environment to begin to find the first solutions, and you'll see why that's so important with the chasm crossing model in just a minute. Eventually, this will get to the vendors and products, and when it gets there, we won't have these conferences. There'll be trade shows, right? It'll look more like a Comdex, right? It'll all be about buy mine, don't buy theirs. Theirs is bad, mine is good, right? We're not there right now, but we will be. But that, and you'll know that we call that the kind of the tornado, and sometimes we call it the time of the great happiness, because there's all this money being spent and everybody's, stock price is going through the roof. And then finally, there are the utilities. And in Silicon Valley, there's a real tendency for the diagonals to sort of resist each other. So there's a real tendency to sort of think, well, the utilities are, they're well-meaning people. They probably ought to intermarry or whatever, but they're not really intelligent life, because obviously engineers, we're the most intelligent life on the planet. We're in the upper left-hand quadrant. We're self-actualized. Those poor guys order. Baloney. It's just, it's not true. Okay. And so as we craft a vision of how to proceed, we have to do it in respect to this. So now, with that in mind, here's where I want to kind of bring it back to this crossing the chasm thing. What this arc of project to solution to product to systems and maintenance should tell us is you can't jump from projects to systems. You really do have to put in place these intermediate things. And so the question is, are we at projects to solutions? Are we at solutions to products? Are we at products to systems? Those are three known transitions. They repair over and over and over again in the evolution of markets around technology-based markets. So it brings us back to this model, which is this crossing the chasm model. In the early market, we got lots of projects, as we'll see in a minute. The early market is the early adopters. It's the people that get it. It's the people that know what a kilowatt hour is and will insist on showing you their iPad application for turning on their hot tub, from 2 cities away, right? They are very different from everyone else, okay? Sometimes they know that, but mostly they don't, okay? Mostly they don't. The chasm keeps them apart from everyone else. Everyone else is going, you know what? I have a lot of things in my life, and I'm not sure energy is one of them. I mean, I know that if there isn't any, it's going to be bad. But could it just work? I mean, I've got other things that I've got, my dog, my kid, my whatever. So they're hanging back, and the reason they're hanging back is they're going, I get that those guys get it, but it's not touching me. And so the first thing we discovered was this notion that this group on the right side of the chasm are pragmatic people. They say, if I have a problem and this fixes it, I will use it. But I'm not going to go looking for a problem to figure out a reason to use it, okay? So you got to start with my problem, not your device, okay? And so what we discovered in tech was that at the beginning, when you're crossing the chasm, there are only a few problems that are present enough in the population and serious enough to warrant immediate attention, and which cannot be solved by the old methods, and which can be solved by your new method. That's the selection criteria. It's got to be an important enough problem with enough weight behind it to pay for crossing the chasm, and the old methods have to not work, and the new method has to be able to be made to work. Okay? When you get to that convergence of things, now you have a chasm crossing application, and that's when the narrative changes from it. So for example, with the Apple Macintosh, when it first came out, it was the computer for the rest of us, and it had a little feather and a little user manual that sort of floated down, and it was all GUI interfaces, and people went, GUI? I thought that was chocolate. No, GUI, G-U-I, GUI interface. And so the people that got the Mac got it and nobody else did. How did it cross the chasm? Turned out desktop publishing was a big problem for corporations, and the Mac nailed it. When it was the tandem computer, it was ATM machines. So the dialogue shifted from nonstop computing, pull the thing out, still keeps running, to you can get cash 24 hours by 7 days a week from a machine at your bank. And all of a sudden, it was a narrative about cash. It wasn't a narrative about nonstop computing. And this thing goes, so all of these things are going forward. That's what those solution models are about. And then there's the tornado, which is, man, I don't know what this, it's like a website. You just got to have a website, right? I mean, everybody's got to have a website. You have to have have your kids told you have to have a Facebook page yet? You have to have a Facebook page. Well, what for? Well, I just have to have a Facebook page. Just get one, right? You want to see your grandchild. Oh, okay, I got it. Okay, that was a good one. And then Main Street is, well, what do you mean? I mean, everybody uses this. It's everywhere. So here's my point about the models. The project model fits the early market. The solution model fits the crossing the chasm. And so the product model fits the tornado and the systems. And so this whole thing about where we are now, if it is in fact crossing the chasm, and that's debatable. You can always say, I'm not sure this is where we are in the life cycle, Geoffrey. But if you think we are at this point in the life cycle, then the game is, okay, how do we apply the crossing the chasm strategy to the smart grid? What would we do? And the first thing you do is you say, look, don't try to solve the universal problem. And by the way, the Crossing the Chasm app is rarely, if ever, the killer app. The killer app is the one that drives the tornado. The Crossing the Chasm app is typically very specific to a constituency who right now desperately needs some way to get help, okay? And you have to, whether that, and if I knew more about your industry, I'd give you 4 or 5 examples. I'm trying to think of examples who might say, guys, maybe it's public transportation. I'm trying to figure out who would be first who would say, look, I don't know if anybody else is going to do this in this decade, but we have to. We've got to get this done now. And whoever that is, those are going to be maybe it's the smart building people in the Sun Belt. I mean, I'm not quite sure, maybe or in Los Angeles where the peak demands aren't working right. I'm not sure where it is. Maybe it's somebody who's got a big commitment to renewable energy and they're trying to figure out how to monetize it. I'm not sure who it is. But it'll be that kind of niche first. And then they'll institutionalize it, and that will be the basis for going forward. So the first problem then is pick your target market. And we always use this example of the presidential primary, which is, you know, Obama came in second in the New Hampshire primary. He came in second in the next one is, I can't remember, Florida, whatever it was. And then he started winning primaries. But if you come in like 4th in all the primaries, nothing, right? You got to win primaries, and you got to win them big in order to put yourself on the map, or at least in this case, you got to put himself on the map with second. So how do you do that? The first thing you got to do is figure out that target beachhead thing. What is the use case that is so compelling that even in a relatively resistant environment, people would cave in for this particular use case? This is one that you're going, this is a no-brainer. Maybe it's a place where acid rain and carbon emissions are you know, driving people crazy. You know, you start thinking of cities in China or Mexico City or places like that. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, you have to have a use case that says, we're not willing to wait. We can't wait. Most people can wait, we can't. And then what you have to do as an industry is figure out, how do we get a solution, a 100% solution to that problem? Pragmatists solve problems, but they need 100% solutions. They can't say, well, this is most of the solution and we kind of hope the rest will come when it comes. Pragmatists will say, no, it's not ready, I won't do it. You have to bring the entire solution to the table. And then that means you have to have people that are representing the products and services who deeply understand the problem you're trying to solve. I was on the board of a company called Documentum. It had document management software. We went into the healthcare industry and went after new drug approval documentation. It's a massive problem. It's a very weird problem, and it caused every pharmaceutical company in the world to buy Documentum for that. And then from there, they spread out and they became the #1 document management for all kinds of documents worldwide. But you have to cross the chasm somewhere first. And figuring where that out, where that is, I think would be a huge gift if this conference could bring some clarity to that question. And what you're doing is you're going to swap out the status quo in that one area. In the rest of the world, you're saying, hey guys, if you want to come along, that's great, but this is the group we're going to serve first. And when we serve that use case, then we'll figure out what use cases, how can we leverage that going forward. So last question to the last slide to kind of put on the table. What would my wish be for where the dialogue goes for the rest of this week? So how to get the smart grid unstuck? I think the first question to ask is, genuinely, do we think we're ready to cross the chasm? And that doesn't mean, are we sick of not being across the chasm? You could easily be sick of still being in the chasm and not be ready to cross. The way you know if you're ready to cross is, have you done enough projects to make sure that in your mind the technology works? Okay. So if we're there, and if we've risk reduced that, then it is in fact time to cross the chasm. Basically, it means I've done enough projects, I'm in the chasm. Okay, but we got to get out. Okay. Do we have a target beachhead identified? Obviously, I don't. If I would have had one, I would have told you what I thought it was. I don't know what the crossing the chasm beachhead is. What I do know is that it will be a broken, mission-critical process, because that's what causes pragmatists to pull out their wallets and say, I'm tired of fiddling around here. We have to do something, and we've got to do it now. And it's not because they love green energy. Okay? It's because whatever their problem is, it's worse than anything that they can imagine. They want to fix it. When you find that one, the question is, does that process have an owner? One of the problems with carbon tax is it's not clear like who owns the sky, like, for carbon. Right? So does the process have an owner? And are they empowered to fix this problem? And if they are, and if you find a genuine problem that you think is focused enough, man, that is the scarcest ingredient in the strategy. We're ready to roll. Then the next question would be, okay, well, who would be the key players to solve that problem? But I got to tell you, once you know the problem, it's pretty easy to reverse engineer the solution team. But who are the key startups that would bring the right technology? Because it will be. There'll be a bunch of people that are part of the solution that are doing stuff that's never been done before. It'll be part of the whole, Silicon Valley. By the way, Silicon Valley extends as a global idea here, that the disruptive innovation of engineering and science. And there will also be some familiar faces at the table to give not only credence, but kind of adult supervision to the unfolding of this thing. As you notice with something like Facebook, there was a lack of adult supervision quite a lot, but you know what? It didn't really matter because it wasn't like you didn't bring down the Eastern power grid, when you set that spam. But it was solvable. But this is serious stuff. You can't. We got to respect the fact that the grid is fragile. And we can't just fiddle with it and see what happens, right? There's a very real need to have both the highly innovative and the somewhat more conservative and trusted group. And then finally, our policies in setting the right behavior. You see over and over again unintended consequences from policies, and the tendency of the policy is to try to incent a behavior that would be appropriate for some other part of the life cycle, but not the one we're in now. And so that's why it's so important to have the dialogue about where are we and what kinds of policies would be most valuable now as opposed to what might be more valuable a decade from now. That's all I wanted to share with you right now. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.